Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name's Simon Hodgkins, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Nikki Simpson. So, Nikki, you're very welcome to the podcast. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself, a little bit about your journey, and all the wonderful things you're involved in. So, over to you, Nikki.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for having me. My name is Nikki Simpson. I'm the founder and director of the International Magazine Centre, which is a membership organisation for small businesses working in and around magazine publishing. Um, I've been at this for about 4 years now, so it's still relatively early days. I often think of it as like as a human being, they wouldn't have even started school yet. So it's always heartening, I think, when you can think about a business that way. Um, The idea came out of some work experience I did about 10 years ago. So I used to work for the Trade Association for Magazine Publishers, the UK one, which, works with all the big publishers like Condé Nast and Haymarket, Future, things like that. Um, and while I was there, I was running the Scotland office. And while I was there, we were working quite a bit with The Drum, which is a media and marketing magazine. And they were doing really innovative things. They were kind of renowned as being risk takers, which they still are, I guess. But yeah, so I thought it'd be great to know a bit more about them and about what they were up to. So I went and did some work experience with them for a week, took a week's holiday, went to them for a week, and basically just earwigged on all their conversations. And what came out of that for me was they started out as a two-man band working from a kitchen in Glasgow and grew to a team of about 40 in Glasgow, similar size in London. At the time I worked with them, they'd just opened a New York office and they were talking about opening a Singapore one. And I believe, I'm not sure, but I believe they've opened now a one in Delhi as well. So I thought if two guys working from a kitchen in Glasgow can grow to that kind of size, then there must be other international publishers who are thinking about coming to the UK, but who would naturally gravitate towards London because that's where they perceive all the advertising money to be. Of course, this was pre-COVID as well, so there was nobody working from home and so on. Um, so I thought, well, wouldn't it be wonderful, rather than letting them just go off to London, to offer them a home in Scotland, somewhere where they felt welcome and supported and nurtured, and somewhere where they could be alongside other publishers to collaborate with, other freelancers who could support them on their journey, where they could get advice on suppliers, where they could get advice on local customs, and so on and so on. So that was the original idea behind the International Magazine Centre. And that idea grew to office and incubator space for both for publishers and for people coming out of university or for brand new publishers. A lot of people start magazines without any prior experience whatsoever. They just go into knowing that they're passionate about a subject and that they want to see that either in print or that they want to share that with other people, or, you know, kind of curate a community around that title, around that subject matter. So yeah, office and incubator space, events and exhibitions, not just for publishers, but also for readers as well. So just before the pandemic, we held our first consumer event, and that's for a while now. It's been on my to-do list to run another, which was great fun. Exhibitions, magazine shop, coffee shop. So I'm sure you can kind of picture what that might look like. But what that looks like, obviously, is very expensive. So in the meantime, while I raise the capital to be able to do that, I'm just building this community of small businesses working in magazine publishing. So we've got about 120 members now, and we provide events and training and mentoring for those people, just doing whatever we can to support them, really. A lot of our work that we do is very focused on building confidence, on showing people that they're just as valuable as a small business than any large business, right? There's a lot of kind of confidence issues with sole traders, with people who haven't spoken to anybody about their business in months. They're just kind of knuckling down and either talking to the wall or talking to their partner who's got their own issues. So being able to offer them a community of people who understand what they're going through, a community of people who can give them advice on how to maybe do things differently or better, or just on what they've done. Offering empathy often is really important, and just showing people that they're part of a larger industry. They're not just focused on that one subject matter that they, talk about to the ends of the earth, but actually they don't talk about the publishing side of it. And yeah, it's going well.
Well, that's great, Nikki. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. A couple of things that you said there made me stop and think. I love when you said, I'm 4 years, and when you look at it that way, it really does focus on, I'm only 4 years in, I'm building something here for the long term. And I really love that. And I also liked what you said about the two guys, scaling from two guys in a kitchen sink to a real, successful media outlet, magazine outlet. That's a great example. And I'm sure a great experience to see that curve, that upwards curve, that trajectory,
Yeah, I think with the 4 years old thing, I think there's
yeah.
so much that we see on social media, especially around, oh, I made, 10 million pounds or something through investment and you can too. Or, I've only been going 6 months and it's really taken off. And I'm just like, well, bully for you. But that's not what's happened to me. And I like my journey. I like knowing that I had no idea what I was doing for the first couple of years. I didn't really know where to focus because I worked for that trade association before. I was kind of still always kind of trying to speak to the same people when actually I needed to, change. I needed to do something that was right for me, not right for the organization that I used to work for. Obviously, right? This is really obvious stuff, but it takes time to realize that for yourself. So if anything, if you take off the first 2 years, it's exactly like a child. First 2 years, they don't know what they're doing. They're learning to walk and poo and, whatever. But as of about 2 years in, I was like, okay, so I know roughly what I want now, at least. And then you've got the past 2 years have just been trying to put all that into place so that it's process driven, which for a long time I've really fought against. I'm not a particularly stereotypical stereotypically corporate person. I'm not, I shy away from that completely. So the words like process and automation used to make my skin crawl. And then, to be honest, I got a business coach and she went, you could automate that and then that would free up loads of time. And I was like, okay, yeah, maybe I could do that. And, processes around things which I didn't have before. And now I do. And it's freeing and it's enjoyable to be able to run a business where I can feel like what I'm doing is helping people without, destroying my own mental health through overwork. And yeah, when it comes to the drums, so many companies start off as a two-man band working from a kitchen. But you've got to bear in mind, those two guys are now in their 50s, and they started off when they were 18. It takes time to build a company. It's not like, again, it's that story, isn't it? It's that like, oh, we made 1 million in however long. It doesn't, I don't even know if that does happen. If it does happen, what do they actually get out of it? Great, they've got the money. What if they, how much have they learned from that process that they've only been involved in for 6 months? I imagine their heads are all over the place. I can't imagine anybody having made that much money over 6 months and then be like, oh yeah, I'm fine with this. It's like almost like winning the lottery, the impact of that on your own mental health would be vast. So to me, it's lovely watching businesses grow. I love supporting small businesses because they don't have an exit strategy. They're interested in their subject matter. They want to be able to support their family and they want to be able to love their job and employ maybe 2 or 3 people, but they're not hell bent on world domination or getting on the stock market. They just want to have a nice life. And I think people undervalue that. But to me, if I get to the end of my life, I'm not going to give a monkeys about how much money I've made. All I'm going to want to know is how many people I've helped, or did I make an impact on other people's businesses or other people's lives? How many friends do I have? These are things that are really important in life, but so often get pushed aside in favor of money, and that just doesn't interest me.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think you're right because, sometimes the stories where it's an overnight success over 10 years, they're the kind of stories I prefer.
Yeah.
Because everybody thinks it's an overnight success, but you often don't see a lot of the hard work that's gone into something over many, many years and sometimes decades. And the other thing that you said in terms of, what's important in life when you get to the end. It's not how many hours you worked or how much money you ended up with, because you can't take anything with you, unfortunately. So
No.
it does come down to legacy, I think. And that some smart people
Yeah.
figure that out earlier on. They say, well, actually, I'm building something here. It's a legacy. I'm doing something that's important, that's meaningful, that makes a
Mm-hmm.
difference. And I think they're the people that actually stand the test of time. And don't we often see, Nikki, that people that make money very quickly, sometimes they don't realize how that came together. Sometimes it's just sheer luck, and hanging on to it and growing it from there and turning that into legacy becomes quite difficult for some people then.
Absolutely. And you learn so much over your business, over not just about how to run a business, but also about yourself as a human being and what's important to you. If you were to make that much money over 6 months, at what point would you have had a chance to breathe and actually ask yourself, what are my values? What's important to me when I'm working with other people? I can't comprehend how fast that must move for people. Anyway, maybe this is just my way of saying I'm really happy with my tiny little membership organization. But
So
I mean,
listen,
I'm not, I mean, I really am happy, and I really am happy with the pace I'm going. I mean, even now you were asking me before we came online, what my plans are for the next 12 months. And for me, actually, one of my main goals is to just bring on lots of new members. So I'm spending a lot of time having I don't like to call them sales calls, because to me it's just meeting somebody and asking them, about their business and seeing if there's ways in which I can help them. But essentially, if you want to break it down, yes, they are sales calls. But I really love that. And I really love meeting those people. I really love coming away from a meeting and saying, I hope that's helped you in some way. You're really welcome to join us as a member, rather than being, driven by the big bucks. I mean, clearly money isn't a driver for me. And I imagine that might be quite, um, maybe that goes against some of what your listeners' goals are, but also having that kind of acknowledgement within myself that I have, that money mindset is really important, right? You have to kind of acknowledge that either you find it difficult to deal with money, or you difficult to talk about it. But for me, it's going, well, I want to make more money, lots more money, just so that I can help more people. It's not about the actual, what am I taking home and how much caviar am I eating? It's about, how many people have I helped on that journey? If I can make enough money to employ a second person, I can hand over all the marketing to them, and then I can just focus on helping people. That would be amazing, just to be able to do that. So
and
that's,
just
for me, that's making money is important, but for different reasons, right?
now, as part of that sort of hub and that community that you really focused on, particularly with a Scottish element and a Scottish flavour, I know you're working towards a goal of opening an international magazine centre, maybe in Edinburgh, this physical building, a hub of expertise, maybe have some dedicated space, etc. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, Nikki?
So the incubator space that I want to have as part of that building, absolutely, I think will make a massive impact. The amount of publishers who I've spoken to who have said, if I'd had that when I was first starting out, that would have transformed my entire business. It would have been incredible to have that support. But in answer to your question around a home, I think, to me, if anybody starting out in business, all they ever want is to feel welcome and to feel part of a community. When you're by yourself, nobody ever wants to be by themselves, right? They never want to be just sitting there going, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if this is the right thing. They want other people to support them. And if you can feel welcome somewhere, not a WeWork, God bless WeWork, I'm sure they're doing brilliant things, but not somewhere where you don't know anybody, or you don't have any kind of affiliation specifically with the other people that are there. If you can join a space where other people are there that are in a similar industry to you, it can transform your business, and it can transform the way you think about your business, because you've got other people to aspire to as well, and people to support you, and all the things that are familiar to us when we feel welcome in a space. I think I've worked for various different companies with various different kind of structural size to them. And the company that I enjoyed working for most was a publisher called White Light Media. And I still remember my first day. When I first started, I was the business manager there. So I was basically doing everything that wasn't actually writing and designing a title. And they'd bought me a new desk, which looked like something out of the Starship Enterprise. It was ginormous. And when I sat down, I was like, hello, like this. And the whole company got up out of their seats and they all crowded around my desk and they're like, hi, welcome. And they're all shaking my hand and saying, nice to meet you and so on. And the contrast between that and other companies that I've worked for, where there was, a bit of grunting and a kind of, hi, how you doing? That welcome completely transformed my perception of the company right from the start. I knew they were welcoming already, but everybody needs that when they're starting out, and especially when you're working for yourself. And I think in regards to attracting people to come and live and work in Scotland, I mean, I'm English originally. I was born in Somerset and grew up in High Wycombe till I was about 8 years old, then moved to Ayrshire, which is quite an anti-English area of Scotland. So that came with its challenges. But I love Scotland. And this, I mean, well, I don't know. We'll see what happens now that Nicola Sturgeon has resigned. But to me, it's just a wonderful place to live and work. But I would say that for me now, when I first started out again, because it was pre-pandemic, because people weren't used to meeting on Zoom, the vast majority of stuff that I was doing was local. But now it's definitely national. All of our online events are attended by people all over the UK and in America and Canada. If the timing is right, obviously. It's difficult if we're doing a 9 o'clock meeting for Canadians to come. But yeah, we have an international audience now, and that's wonderful. We run training courses with a woman in Australia and a guy in New York, and it's just kind of, it's a global village now, right? So for a physical space, I still absolutely want to have that in Edinburgh and Scotland. But I think from a wider organizational wider community, it would just, it makes sense to just bring people together from all over the world, because there are literally millions of small publishers out there. I mean, it never fails to amaze me how many thousands and thousands of titles are, literally millions of titles, and across every single subject possible that you can ever think of. And if there isn't a title for the thing that you're interested in, then there's a gap in the market. So let me know what it is, and I'll pass that on to a publisher and see if they want to publish something on it. Because if you can think of a niche, it's there. Like,
So, as somebody who's dabbled a little bit in magazine publishing, one of the things that I heard, and maybe you can tell me whether it holds any water, whether it's true or not, but magazines, I believe, or at least I'm told, are quite resilient when it comes to downturns and recessions because they're often viewed as a little small luxury that people won't go without. And I subscribe to a number of magazines, which I really look forward to receiving. I love the printed word. I love the ink on paper. I love cracking the spine of a new magazine issue when it comes out. And I like to also support maybe some smaller magazines that aren't necessarily the ones that you would find in the big bookstores or in the big magazine retail outlets. And I sort of long for the days where you could have a lot more magazine type kiosks on the street where you could go and browse and pick them up. But is there something quite special about magazines? Are they a little bit recession proof? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it depends which kind of title. I mean, when the pandemic hit, a lot of magazine titles closed because it was just a perfect storm. Nobody wanted to advertise. A lot of magazines run events off the back of their titles, so all the events closed overnight. Um, and of course, nobody could go to the shops to actually buy one off the newsstand, So, um, so that was horrible. It was horrible to witness, and it was horrible to not really be able to offer that much support in that instance because everybody, when the pandemic hit, were just going, "What do we do?" Um,
Did it
but
come back to subscriptions and building community, back to the
yeah,
things that you
so a
were
lot
doing?
of publishers saw a massive leap in subscriptions. A lot of publishers really, so one of our members, for example, they're a mountain biking publisher, and a lot of their income comes through programmatic advertising, but on their website because they get a lot of traffic to their website. So they get about 70,000 hits on their website a day, which is all mountain biking related, 60,000 of which incidentally go direct to their forum. But of course, if you're not getting those 70,000 hits on your website because everybody's just Googling stuff about COVID, then you're not seeing any of the normal income that you would get. So what he did was he put a note out on his forum saying, hi guys, hope you're all okay. Hope, none of you are ill. But just to let you know that, this is the way we run our business. And if none of you guys are coming onto the website, then, this has an impact on us. So would you consider becoming a member to be able to support us during this crisis? And so they saw a massive switch in the amount of income that they've now got coming in through recurring revenue on memberships and subscriptions in comparison to advertising, which was before, which was their main income source. And there's a lot of publishers like that. I mean, the most amazing publisher during the pandemic, by far, I don't think anybody would disagree with me on this, was The Big Issue. So obviously they sorry for anybody who's listening internationally, The Big Issue is a street paper. It's designed and edited by an office in Glasgow with support from London, and then their vendors buy the magazine for, I think it's £2, and then they sell it for £4, and then they take the profit for themselves. And this is, the only source of income for many homeless people. So when the pandemic hit, again, that perfect storm of people weren't able to buy the magazine because nobody was out in the streets. Nobody wanted to use cash anymore because it was seen as dirty and a way to contract COVID. And then their vendors had no support and nobody to talk to anymore. So a lot of the interactions that the vendors get with just normal people buying the magazine that's a huge part of their day. It's really important. So The Big Issue decided to really push their subscriptions and now have a massive increase in subscriptions. They set up a podcast for people to leave messages to their vendors and for their vendors to leave messages for them. They started going out on the newsstand. So I mean, that's massive in itself to actually just launch a newsstand offering during a pandemic. It was just mad. And so on and so on. They had so many amazing initiatives. And then they donated all of the money that they raised extra through subscriptions. They sending that directly to their vendors who are then being looked after. I mean, for a magazine, people say magazines aren't life or death, but that's literally life or death for these vendors. And so, I mean, for me, that's like, well, it's just amazing to be able to see how quickly they turned it around. And they did all of that in the space of about 2 weeks. It's just mind blowing.
It's incredible, Nikki, and thanks very much for sharing a little bit of insight into that, because it impacts in so many different ways, and that, I suppose, that agility or that ability to turn around so quickly in 2 weeks made a substantial difference, not
Yeah,
only to
huge.
that business surviving, but to the people throughout that sort of supply chain, if you like, everybody that was connected to that organization that were depending on that money.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, well, look, let's change gear a little bit now. I want to ask you a little bit about yourself. I want to dive into your own learning style. I want to understand about how you onboard information, because obviously, as a founder and a director of the International Magazine Centre, I'm sure you're always taking on board. You're looking at new titles, new publications. You're recruiting these new members. But what kind of things do you find yourself reading? Are you an audiobook person? Do you like the written word? You obviously have a passion for magazines, so I'm sure there's some titles that you can't live without. Do you like, watching YouTube? Do you just turn on Netflix at the end of the evening? How does that work for you, Nikki?
So no, I do not like YouTube. Although I suppose I do love it. But my boy is 5 years old, and it's just impossible getting him off it. So I try to avoid YouTube whenever I can. I spend a lot of time in business meetings on Zoom, so anything that involves a screen in my spare time, I try to avoid. Um, but yeah, I read a lot of magazines. Obviously, I think I counted up my subscriptions the other day. I think I have about 9 subscriptions, which I hear is unusual. Uh, but yeah, that's okay with me. Um, yeah, I listen to podcasts occasionally. I mean, interesting you asking about what the kind of things that I read. So I'm really into nature, to be honest with you. I love gardening of all things. I love mowing the lawn. I've got this ginormous garden that takes me about a day to mow. But my favorite book of recent years is a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, which is cut by Robin Wall Kimmerer, if I've pronounced that right. And she's a Native American Indian by heritage, but she's also a botanist. So Native American Indian attitudes are all about reciprocity. So they're all about making sure that you're in harmony with the nature around you, and you're always either giving thanks if you're taking something from the land, or you're replenishing it. So alongside a much more scientific perspective as a botanist, which is just a really interesting dichotomy, I think. But also, I mean, this is it's not a work of fiction, this magazine. It's all about her experiences over her life and so on. But for example, maybe this will lose some of your listeners, but I loved it. She has an entire chapter just on how wild strawberries make her feel, which is just it's so poetic to read. It's just beautiful. And I came away from that book feeling like I had fed my soul for the past whatever. I'm a very slow reader, so maybe the past month or whatever. And I think it's quite rare that you read a book like that. I often read books where I feel a bit like angry at myself for actually reading them in the first place, because I'm just like, this is just either the writing's poor, or I don't like the style of whoever's writing, or whatever it is that they're writing about. It's just really, not of interest to me. But it just lifted me up in every single way. And I felt like every time I was reading it, I just felt like I was just feeding myself really good, like going on a really wonderful health kick for a month. I don't know. So that was wonderful. That's my favorite book of recent times. And then I think when it comes to magazines, I mean, the magazines that I really love are the ones which, again, speak to people as a human being. So there are lots of running titles out there. I don't run as much as I used to before I had my kid, but when I was looking for a running title before I had him, I was always I would always find magazines that are, what you should eat, or what shoes you should wear, or this magazine is sponsored by Adidas or whatever. Much more about, look how lean and fit and wonderful I am, which didn't resonate with me at all, and I think doesn't resonate with a lot of people. But people often buy them for a kind of aspirational way of reading. Magazines are funny like that. Sometimes you buy a magazine to feel like you could be the kind of person that reads that magazine, even if you're not actually interested in the content. It's a funny way that things work, right? Anyway, I found this beautiful title called Like the Wind, which I'll show you. I know you people on the podcast won't be able to see, but here you go. It's perfect bound. It's very beautiful. And it's all about, well, the strap line is, it's why we run. So it's not about the food that you eat, or anything like that, or it's all about people and why they run and how they feel when they're running, and it how it's a thing of wonder for them, and a thing of release for them, and a thing of empowerment, and often independence as well. It's the time when you get away to be by yourself, or to be relax in your own head, and so on and so on. So I love that as a title. And many others. Jeepers, Simon. I mean, I could sit here for the next hour just talking about all the fantastic magazines I love. I would say it's interesting what you were saying earlier about how, you miss being able to just pick up a magazine in the street and see what it's about. I mean, not in the street, but, on a street stand. And I would say that the kinds of magazines that people, when they think of the magazine industry, they think of Radio Times, Hello Magazine, Cosmopolitan. Those tend to be like the three that people kind of, immediately think of. But just to say, I suppose that there, as I've said before, there are millions of other titles out there. But that if you're interested in finding out more about other unusual titles, and there's two great sources of that in the UK. So and I'm sure they deliver internationally. So there's Mag Culture, which is a shop in London, which has is just full of independent titles. And then there's a subscription service called Stack Magazines. And Stack sends out a different independent title every month. So you get something new in the post every month. And then if you like that title specifically, then you can, go out and subscribe to it or whatever. Or you can just wait for the next title to come from Stack, which is, they're always really interesting, often international titles that I'd never heard of before. With millions of titles out there, it is physically impossible for me to contact every publisher that I know. So it's wonderful to just have magazines coming to me that I'm like, this is an amazing title, and they're often weird and wonderful, or sometimes just pieces of art. I think, this is a business podcast, but I think that often we don't place enough emphasis. Maybe we do more in the creative world, but certainly in the magazine industry, there's a lot of emphasis on how to make money, on the best design to sell your magazine, on what front cover is going to sell best, these kind of things. And so many titles are looked down upon because they are just passion projects. And I hate that. I always just think, well, again, if you get to the end of your life and you think about all the wonderful things that you've done, are you going to think about, again, A, the amount of money you've made on that wonderful title that you produced, or are you going to think about that passion project that you put your heart and soul into, that maybe 10 people read, maybe 1,000 people read it, maybe 100,000 people read it. Either way, it was yours, it was your baby, and it resonated with people.
Yeah, and I love, well, I love everything that you've just said, but there's a couple of things that stuck with me. Feeding your soul with a book, I think, is such a wonderful phrase. And it's kind of when you get that book and you just kind of don't want it to end, and you really feel like it's doing you some good. And I think that they are truly the books that take pride of place, I think, on your bookshelf. And I also love I don't know whether serendipity is the right word, but the fact that somebody else is creating a magazine to send you on a regular basis, because it's probably a title that you wouldn't necessarily have found yourself, that you wouldn't have picked up or purchased. And just, I'm a big believer in reading things that are outside your normal vision of scope, that normal sort of range that you have. So I really like that idea. And I agree wholeheartedly what you said, Nikki, that sometimes it's not just about the money. The money, the passion, the creativity that goes into producing a title in a magazine. And even when you held up that example, one of your first comments was, it's beautifully bound,
I said it was perfect bound, actually.
perfect bound. Yeah.
That's a term for the type of binding,
Yeah,
but
exactly. Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
right, it is perfect as well.
But you kind of, you can feel it. It's tangible, There's something nice when somebody's actually thought about the paper stock and the binding and the imagery, etc. And it's kind of, I'm not saying that some of the big titles don't do that, but it is about, well, which celebrity do we put on the front, because that'll sell the copies this month.
Yeah, and I think I think that could be hard as well for working for a larger publisher when you have that passion and you want to be able to create an even better title, or a title that does something slightly different or whatever. And obviously, these comments that I'm making are coming from an absolute position of privilege, where I'm not having to worry about paying my bills every month because my magazine isn't making enough money. So I'm not putting down anybody that's trying to make money with a magazine. Far from it. If anything, if they're making money, that's fantastic, and it's great for the industry and great for the people that they employ, and for the the family that they're feeding or whatever. But I suppose what I'm saying is that lots of people don't start these things, or they feel like it's just a passion project, when actually, to me, these are just as valid things. They're things that are just as important in life. And maybe, if you're in a position to be able to dedicate time to that, or dedicate your own savings to that, then fantastic. But if you're not in a position to be able to do that, there are other ways that you can feed your own creativity. There are other ways to feed that passion monster, as it were. Like, for example, I went on a doodling workshop for an hour yesterday through a freelance illustrator. She's awesome. I did it through Freelancer magazine, and I know everybody on that just loved it. But it was so random, and it was using the other side of your brain. And I don't think I'll ever give away the really crap pictures that I drew out of that. This is I was just showing an awful picture. But there are things that you can do which are just as important in your life and don't take any money, don't take any time, don't take any commitment. Can just be a way to feed your soul a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I think Freelancer magazine, that's Sophie Cross, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, she's
Yeah, I
awesome.
think what she's doing there is absolutely awesome.
Yeah,
It's
she
really,
is.
really good. Yeah.
Yeah. She started off she's a marketer by trade, and she started off her magazine by, she was a freelance marketer, and when the pandemic hit, she was part of lots of, um, freelance networks, especially around copywriting and marketing. And that was her idea. She's like, well, does anybody want a magazine? Does anybody think this could be useful to them? And the whole community went, yeah, that would be amazing. So she did it on Kickstarter. She did fantastically from it. And I think she's on issue 6 or 7 now. I can't remember. Sorry, Sophie, if you listen to this. And yeah, she's done some fantastic work and has got a real community of engaged and passionate people around her brand.
Yeah, I've loved that title from the start. I've even placed some advertising in it. Yeah, I'm
Oh,
a big,
awesome.
big,
That's really
big
cool.
supporter of it. Yeah, yeah. Look, I want to squeeze in a couple more questions before we run out of time today, Nikki. And the other thing I want to ask you about is, throughout your journey, people that you admire, people that inspire you. It might just be a personality or character trait, but when I ask you that question, what springs to mind for you?
It's a hard one for me. I often find that the people who I really admire, when I meet them or find out more about them, I'm not so much disappointed. It's just, I think maybe that separation for me of being in awe of them and them realizing that makes me tongue-tied, and then I can't have a conversation with them. It's like that question, who would you invite to a dinner party? And I'm like, well, Stephen Fry, obviously, but then I wouldn't be able to speak for the whole meal. you know, so um, there's a it's I always find it a difficult question to answer. But I think, what kind of people I admire, I think are people who just get on with it, who get things done. I find it difficult to speak to people who um have got stuck in a situation where they can't really see a way out, and they are caught up in the kind of minutiae of whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. And actually, if they took a step back from it and just went, well, bugger it, let's just do it, then a lot of stuff would happen. And I suppose that's why I first wanted to go and do that work experience at the Drum, because they're like that all the time. They're just like, well, come on, let's try it. Let's try this. Let's try that. I remember sitting in on an editorial meeting with Gordon Young, who's one of the directors, and it was quite painful to watch, because the editor of the magazine was trying to juggle what he was saying. He was making 15 different suggestions across one magazine about different ways in which they could approach it, and was constantly pivoting to a new idea, another new idea, another new idea. And she was sitting back going, okay, Gordon, well, just, tell us what you want us to do, please. But I really admire that. I really admire that way of being, of that kind of just trying everything, seeing what sticks, and then sticking with that thing all the time, and doing more and more of that. So yeah, I admire that kind of person. I admire Gordon, actually. He's a good guy, lovely guy.
Yeah,
um
that's great. I mean, finding out what works, working it through, and then repeating that is often a good plan. That's for sure. But I'm sure
Absolutely.
that experience, that work experience that you mentioned, that must have been a great learning curve too, Nikki.
Oh, I was only there for a week, huh? And I was just,
Yeah,
I mean, as I say, I was just listening on people's conversations. But it
yeah,
was, I mean, I think, yeah, it was fun.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, maybe delete that question, huh? Not much got much to say about that. As I say, I was
Well,
only there for a week.
anybody who's, I mean, look, everybody knows the Drum, and particularly in marketing circles, it's
Yeah,
very
it's
well
true. Yeah.
respected. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the other thing I want to ask you about is advice. Is there some advice that you have picked up along the way that you hold close to your heart that you think is really important in life, or do you often find yourself offering advice to others?
Well, a bit of both, really. So, best piece of advice I've ever received was from a dear friend of mine called Peter Houston, who's co-host of the Media Voices podcast. And I met him when I was working my last role. He's from Greenock originally, but that's in Scotland, and but lives down south now. Lives in kind of Cheshire kind of direction. And he wanted to come up to Scotland, so got in touch with me, and was, I don't even know at the time. I think they were kind of thinking about moving back up to Scotland, and he wanted to kind of, have a chat about what was going on in the industry. Anyway, that's by the by. We're really good friends now. And when I first told him about the International Magazine Centre idea, we were at a drinks reception in London after the Mag Culture conference, and I mentioned it. I was like, "So I'm thinking about opening a physical building, magazine publishing. What do you think? Don't tell anybody." And he said, "Tell everyone, because as soon as you've told everyone, then you're going to have to do it." And so that's my best piece of advice, I suppose. If you're thinking about doing something, especially something big that you think is too much, tell everyone, because then they'll hold you to it, and then you'll just have to do it. So that's my best piece of advice. And then the advice that I give to other people, is massively around magazine publishing. Lots of stuff around recurring revenue, around distribution, around just trying to support people in everything that they're doing. How to approach whatever problem it is that's magazine related.
I like that a lot. And I suppose before we wrap up, I want to ask you a couple of other quick things. I'm going to squeeze them in. And one is what the next 6-12 months look like for you. Is there anything that on the horizon that you'd like to share with our audience that maybe we haven't touched on at all?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So we run events throughout the year, and two of which are in-person events. Everything else is online, but two of which are in person. So we've got our away day coming up in May, which is like a half day's conference followed by dinner, drinks, and an overnight stay, which is super fun if that's something that anybody would be interested in coming to. And then we've got our annual conference, Magazine Street, which is on the 5th of October in Edinburgh. And yeah, everybody's welcome there. Early bird tickets, super early bird tickets, I think, are going to be on sale until the end of April. So yeah, I'll give you a link to that if anybody wants to come.
That sounds great. And I suppose the last thing, Nikki, if people want to find out more about you, if they want to find out more about all the great work that you're doing, or maybe even have a conversation about that wonderful hub that you're planning to build, how can they get in touch with you? Where do you want to send people? Is it to the website? Is it LinkedIn? What's the
Yeah, I
best
mean, you
way?
can check out our website. It's internationalmagazinecentre.com. Or yeah, do connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Nikki Simpson. That's Nikki Simpson. And yeah, I love, as you can tell, Simon, I love talking. So if anybody wants to meet me, that would be great. I'd love to hear all about them too.
Well, look, that's a lovely note for us to end on. So thanks very much indeed to Nikki Simpson, the founder and director of International Magazine Centre. Thanks to everybody for watching and listening to this episode around the world. Make sure you like, follow, subscribe, do all the things that I need you to do to help support this podcast. And I hope you'll meet me back here for more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. Thank you, Nikki. It's been a pleasure to catch up with you today.
Thanks for having me, Simon. It's been great to talk to you.